In the second installment of this season's Hollywood Gamechangers series, documentarian and award-winning author Steven C. Smith will share with us The Lady Eve from 1941. In talking to people before Steven comes up, I'm amazed by how many people have not seen the movie, including myself, so I'm looking forward to it. Like the other screen classics we'll be seeing, it defied the rules, advanced the art of filmmaking, and remains among the most entertaining movies ever made. Steven Smith is an award-winning author, 4-time Emmy nominee, and 6-time Telly Award winner. His over 200 documentaries include collaborations with Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Martin Scorsese, Julie Andrews, Stephen Sondheim, and Sidney Poitier. He is also the author of biographies of Oscar-winning composers Max Steiner and Bernard Herrmann. Let's give a great welcome to Steven Smith.
Thank you, Christine. I love all the color today. This is really fun. Thank you so much, Christine. Thank you, Abe. And thank all of you for being here. I know this is a very busy time of year, so I appreciate it, but I don't think you'll regret it. This is a very fun movie today. And I would like to start the program with a question. What do John Huston, Greta Gerwig, George Lucas, and Quentin Tarantino have in common other than the fact that they are movie directors? Yes, the answer is yes, they are directors who have written their own movies. And today, of course, it's perfectly normal for a gifted screenwriter to direct his or her own material. But back in the so-called golden age of Hollywood, none of the major studios would allow a lowly scriptwriter to sit in the director's chair. There was a division of labor there, at least not until this man, who was definitely a game changer. In 1939, writer Preston Sturges changed the future of movies by convincing an A-list studio, Paramount Pictures, to let him direct his own screenplay. And the result was an amazing run of smash hits for Sturges, a filmmaker often called the king of screwball comedy. And I'll let you enjoy the photos for just 1 second because I have a lot to say about him in a short time. Without a break, this rather hyperactive genius directed 7 classic movies, all hits, in the space of 4 years. I know, it's still amazing. Most of those movies pushed boundaries by mixing comedy and drama or taking on subjects that were considered too controversial for the screen, everything from political corruption to unwed motherhood. And these are comedies in the 40s. And today we're going to see my favorite of the batch from 1941, The Lady Eve. This is a romantic comedy starring the great Barbara Stanwyck and, somewhat surprisingly, Henry Fonda. At the time, Fonda was thought of mostly as a dramatic actor. He had just starred in Young Mr. Lincoln and The Grapes of Wrath. But with The Lady Eve, Fonda showed that he could excel at comedy, from sophisticated to slapstick. And that is a typical range of styles that you will see in a Preston Sturges movie, because Sturges liked to play every key on the comedy keyboard when it came to finding ways of making audiences laugh. And maybe, after the movie, making them think a little, too, about how people scheme or fall in love and do things that make them soar to the heavens or hit the earth hard. It was all part of what Sturges called the cockeyed caravan, that is to say, life. The films of Preston Sturges often move in a world of privilege, but within that world, things are rarely what they seem. And as outrageous as his characters often are, many had their origins in Sturges's own extraordinary life. And here is a very quick telling of some of the highlights. In 1901, when Preston was 3, his ambitious mother Mary divorced her traveling salesman husband, and with Preston in tow, she left their home in Chicago and traveled to Paris to pursue a singing career. When that didn't work out, she married a rich stockbroker, and then she divorced him. So armed with plenty of money, she started elbowing herself and her somewhat reluctant young son into Europe's top social circles. Mary attached herself to a celebrity, Isadora Duncan, the world's most famous ballet dancer. One day, Isadora was wearing a scarf that Mary had given her, and that scarf caught on the front wheel of her car, snapping Isadora's neck and killing her. By then, young Preston Sturges realized that truth could be stranger than fiction, and his life was full of these epic swings between enormous success and total disaster. As a youth, Preston was shuttled back and forth between his stockbroker stepfather, whom he loved, and his high-living mother. He was fascinated by the world of big business that he saw through his adopted dad, and he took note of the eccentric rich people that he met through his mother. Most of all, he remembered his mother's forceful and often witty personality. She is believed to have inspired many of his strongest female characters, and you will definitely see a strong female character in today's movie. After serving in World War I, Sturges ran a cosmetic business in New York, and there he made his first fortune by inventing an allegedly kiss-proof lipstick. In 1927, while recovering from appendicitis, he gave himself a new challenge: to write something successful. And 2 years later, his comic play, Strictly Dishonorable, became one of Broadway's biggest hits of 1929, running over 500 performances. But by 1931, the Depression had hit, and Sturges, who loved the high life, had lost all his money. He had married a rich divorcee who, after a short time, divorced him. But his play, Strictly Dishonorable, had just been made into a successful film, so he decided to try his luck in Hollywood. There, as he later said, quote, "I started at the bottom, a bum who had once written a hit called Strictly Something or Other. My wife had decamped, my fortune was depleted, and even though I was living on coffee and moonlight, my costs of living continued to cost." But desperation led to inspiration. Sturges gained a reputation for improving other people's scripts with sharp dialogue, and he wrote innovative originals like The Power and the Glory, starring Spencer Tracy. That drama was about a recently deceased American power broker whose story is told in non-chronological order by the people who knew him best. And yes, the same structure used in Citizen Kane 8 years later. By 1939, Sturges had money and a stellar reputation as a writer in Hollywood, but he wanted more. After watching directors, in his opinion, mangle his scripts, debatable, he made Paramount Pictures an unprecedented offer. He agreed to sell the studio The Great McGinty, his best original screenplay, for the price of $1 if he was allowed to direct it. Paramount agreed and bought it for the more generous amount of $10. Let's listen to his friend, Priscilla B. Woolen, tell what happened next.
I said to him, "Preston, it was your favorite story. Why did you sell it for that price?" And he said, "Because I want to be a prince of the blood." And that's what a director is. And of course, as you know, the picture was a smash hit.
Based on stories of political corruption related to Sturges by a New York judge, The Great McGinty tells of a bum who rises through a crooked system to the height of power, only to be tossed out when he becomes an honest man. The film's humor was unsurpassingly cynical for its time. Its honesty about certain realities was something fresh in Hollywood movies. And Sturges had his cake and ate it, too, winning the first Academy Award in the newly created category, Best Original Screenplay.
That clip, by the way, is from an excellent documentary called Preston Sturges, The Rise and Fall of an American Dreamer. Well, in the wake of The Great McGinty's success, other Hollywood writers began directing their own scripts, most notably Billy Wilder. For Preston Sturges, The Great McGinty kicked off the fastest run of success any Hollywood writer-director has ever had. Sturges followed McGinty with 6 consecutive hits, including The Lady Eve. Now, as you may have guessed, Sturges was constantly, frenetically in motion. While directing movies, he kept inventing things. He ran a restaurant. He directed live theater. He produced someone else's movie. He juggled multiple affairs and marriages. And for a time, at least, he had a glorious life. The shooting of his films was loose and open to spontaneity. Between takes on the Lady Eve, it is said, Barbara Stanwyck and Henry Fonda did not go back to their trailers. Instead, they hung out with Preston Sturges and listened to stories from his adventurous life. Stanwyck said that making this movie was like being at a carnival. So what makes The Lady Eve so special as a film? Well, for me, it's the way that Sturges balances the cynicism that he acquired as a young man, especially his distrust of appearances, with the eloquent romanticism that was also part of his nature. Add to that a twist-filled plot, endlessly quotable dialogue, great character actors in rich supporting roles, plus wardrobe from the legendary Edith Head. Let's see for yourself, because here from 1941, let's meet The Lady Eve. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly did. I have just a little more to tell you, and then we have a short time for questions, about 10 minutes, so I hope you'll stick around for that. The Lady Eve was written by Preston Sturges specifically for Barbara Stanwyck, who I think he was in love with. There's some correspondence that would support that idea. Stanwyck had starred in an earlier film that Preston Sturges had written but did not direct, a lovely Christmas romance called Remember the Night, a good rental for this month, by the way. During the making of that movie, Barbara Stanwyck remarked to Sturges that no one ever wrote comedies for her. Sturges said that he would, and as the actress later observed, he kept his word, and how. There is much more to the story of Preston Sturges, but time is limited today, as I mentioned. So at this point, I would like to open this up to a conversation with you and just say that if you would like to contact me between now and our next screening, which is, take note, January 14th, that's in the program booklet, and you can find it on the library website. We're going to take a little break between now and the holidays. But January 14th, come back for the next film. But in the meantime, just a few minutes for questions. So if Steven, you and team can bring up the lights, that would be great. I would love it if anybody had thoughts about the movie or anything else. Does anyone have a comment? Anything at all? Yes, right there. No, you will not be seeing Basic Instinct in my series. I'm sorry. I hate to disappoint you. The only game changer that was for me was to never want to see another movie written by Joe Eszterhas again. But I respect your taste. And no, I like the classic films, and I'll be sticking with those. Thank you very much. Sorry about that. But fortunately, they are all available on streaming. Yes, sir. Great. These movies were tremendous hits at the box office. Sturges had 7 hits between 1940, and I think the last was released in 1945. He made movies so fast they didn't release them as quickly as he was making them. He was averaging, I think, 2.5 movies a year during this incredible period at Paramount, which, again, was about 3.5 years. And he once was asked what a hit was, and he said, "A hit is a thing you do between flops." And in addition to being a funny line, it was a prophetic line because unfortunately, amid all this success, he was one of the highest paid people in America, Sturges. He had a nemesis at Paramount. There was an executive who disliked him strongly, and the feeling was mutual, Buddy DeSilva, the former songwriter. And Sturges grew more and more frustrated with the top office at Paramount, and he finally decided, fine, I've got my talent, I can go elsewhere. What no one realized at the time, and it happened to a lot of great filmmakers, is it was the alchemy of having this particular crew, team, the cast of actors that he would bring in that were on staff at Paramount, this magical time where they all understood each other and spoke this shorthand. And when Preston Sturges moved on to work first very disastrously with Howard Hughes, who was kind of one of those, here, take all the money in the world and do something. Not a great plan with Preston Sturges, who was doing 10 things simultaneously. That brief collaboration flamed out without without a hit. And then Sturges went to 20th Century Fox, and he made one terrific movie there called Unfaithfully Yours. A few of you may have seen it with Rex Harrison. Very clever movie about a great conductor who is suspicious of his wife, played by Linda Darnell. And as he conducts these three symphonic pieces, we go into Rex Harrison's mind as he conducts, and he imagines these scenarios of how he's going to address the situation, and then we see what ultimately happens. That movie, though, was so unusual and rather dark, it was a big flop. And Sturges spent the rest of his life pretty much struggling. But, and I will just say it's a rather morbid detail to share, but it seems appropriate for him somehow. He was always planning a comeback, and he was working in the late 50s on his autobiography. And his title for the book was The Events Leading Up to My Death. Well, guess what happened when he started writing it? So sadly, it was, but the good news is it was this amazing, amazing time where he made 7 great movies that we still have. And he opened the door for so many people. The very first one was Billy Wilder, who immediately began directing his scripts at Paramount. And Billy Wilder had one of my favorite quotes about the ever-active Sturges. When Wilder was asked what he thought of Preston Sturges, he said, "A man for all seasons. Too many seasons." So the moral of the story is don't run a restaurant, a nightclub, and 10 other things at the same time and make 7 movies and think you're just going to be able to keep doing it. So yes. Yes, sir. Yes, yes. Yes, yes. Exactly, asking about the budget of the film, and it's a great point. He was remarking how the Depression's pretty much about to end. It's 1941. We're about to enter the war when this movie comes out, and the good news of the system was that Paramount was doing well, thanks in part to Preston Sturges, thanks to some other movies they were making, and everybody was on staff and stars, unless they were people like Barbara Stanwyck, who came in just for this movie. She was very smart and worked at different studios throughout her career. She wasn't usually a staff actor. But the budgets were really under control on a movie like this because everything was under contract. You had a grand staircase set that you could redress. You had ship sets that you could do. I do a lot of movie documentaries, and for a DVD of a movie, a thriller set on a ship called Dangerous Crossing, which looks like a very lavish A movie at Fox, my behind the scenes shows how Fox was making a 1953 version of Titanic, starring Barbara Stanwyck, and this enterprising producer said, let's make a thriller set on a ship. And you've got all these costumes for this upcoming Gentlemen Prefer Blonde, and these other, they just basically took everything at the Fox studio to make it. That's not what they had to do on this. They didn't cut any corners on this. This was an A movie. By now, we're a year into Sturges establishing himself as this Babe Ruth of movie directors, just knocking one out of the park after another. And in the poster of the movie, you see his name prominently placed, which was very unusual for a director at that time. So I'm sorry I don't know the exact budget, but I will say that it probably cost about $1 million, which is what an A budget was. I can tell you that remember when Hopsy writes the check for $32,000? That would be today about $640,000. So it was a not insubstantial amount. Yes, so the movie cost more than that check did, but only about $300,000 more, I'm going to guess. Yes.
It seems like most of the actors, male actors in particular in those days, could play comedy and drama equally well, like Clark Gable, Jimmy Stewart, and Henry Fonda.
Yes, remarking at the versatility of a lot of I'd say the movie stars were versatile in playing both drama and comedy. I mean, there were exceptions. Greta Garbo, whose career was ending right around this time, only made one comedy, Ninotchka, in which she's sort of playing almost a parody of her very, very serious self. But you're absolutely right. Clark Gable and Bogart, and Bogart leaned toward drama, but he could do comedy when he had to. They were expected to be versatile if they were going to be on staff and to have the buildup that they had, because the studios put a lot of money into this. And I have to say, reminding me of mentioning Henry Fonda, another fun little story is that in order to make The Grapes of Wrath the previous year, a movie that Fonda was desperate to do, he knew he was born to play Tom Joad, he very reluctantly signed a 7-year contract with Daryl Zanuck at 20th Century Fox. That was the only way Fonda could get that role, and Zanuck knew that he had a royal flush, as Charles Coburn would say, in his hand. But the great thing studios would do is they could make even more money out of Henry Fonda if they loaned him to Paramount Pictures for a movie like this, which is what they did, The Lady Eve. This was made while Fonda was under contract at Fox, and a lot of those Fox movies he did are really forgettable during that period because, let's face it, they're making several movies a year. So you can imagine what a joy it must have been for him to join this carnival, as Barbara Stanwyck called it, and make this movie. I think he had a great time. One last question here, and two more questions, but in the back, yes. Very good question. Was there a remake or reboot? Yes, there was a remake in the 50s, since Paramount owned the film. They made a version of it called, I think, The Birds and the Bees, with my late friend Mitzi Gaynor in the Barbara Stanwyck part and a comedian named George Goebel, not much of an actor, in the Henry Fonda part. It was not a success. And then there was a stage musical version that I don't think ever made it to Broadway. My brother would know, I think it was called Up the Amazon or Toward the Amazon or something, not a very good title. And I know nothing about it other than it was another attempt. But I tend to agree with the people who say, why don't they remake movies that didn't work the first time but had a good story? But it's always tempting when people have a good script like this one, and Paramount did own the script, and that's why they made it. And the final question belongs to James B. Harris in the front row. Yes, sir.
Do you know anything about Sturges' use of music? There's like 5 popular songs.
Yes. I'm glad you brought that up. James was asking about the use of music. You might have noticed some popular songs. Rodgers and Hart, Isn't It Romantic? Lover was in there, thank you. And Cocktails for Two, and then the main love theme, which has the title about the moonlight in your hair and all that. I can't remember that very long song title. Beautiful theme. This is something that all the studios did. Paramount owned all of those songs because Rodgers and Hart had written those Rodgers and Hart songs for the great movie, which I think I'll show someday, Love Me Tonight, 1932. Great movie, great songs. Well, Paramount could use them. And when you watch Warner Brothers movies, you will hear all these great songs that might have originally come from Busby Berkeley movies, because those were made at Warner Brothers, or other musicals they made. And so it was very common for the studios at the time to use as underscoring songs that they owned. And in this movie, and in all of Sturges's movies, the way he described it, he was dragged around Europe by his collar with his mother, being dragged to classical music concerts and art openings and things. And as much as he complained, he ingested it all. So along with all the popular songs, which he loved, there's some very funny use of classical music in this, like when Henry Fonda says to the Lady Eve that he's going to forgive her. He plays a theme from a Wagner opera, and then it turns into the Poet and Peasant Overture when the train starts going through the storm and all that, which is one of the most cacophonous classical music overtures of all time. So Sturges was, very canny about his use of music as well. And with that, I'd like to say thank you all for coming. Happy holidays, and do come back January 14th for movie number 3. Thank you all. Bye-bye.